Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. The Emergency Act that was brought in place by the federal government back last February is currently subject to an inquiry in our national capital, taking a look at whether it was actually called for or not. And Dan Donovan, who is the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine, has been following it very closely. He's in Ottawa, obviously, but he's an individual that is involved in politics. Currently has been in the past, is now a journalist, publisher of Ottawa Life magazine, and I think has been following it on a daily basis and has some really interesting insights into what's going on. So I want to chat with Dan tonight. Welcome to the show, sir.
Ryan, always nice to be on your program. I love it. I love listening to the different interviews you do every week, and I'm always happy to be here.
My pleasure having you back. So tell me, what do you think about this inquiry so far?
Wow. I mean, that's a loaded question because this inquiry has so far lifted the veil on so many things related to the federal government, the provincial government, the local government, law enforcement, protesters, wingnuts and crazy people, and just really shines a light on the sort of peculiarities in our democracy and what's working and what isn't. And it's laid out for the public to see what incompetence looks like. That's what I would say after watching this over the last number of weeks.
Incompetence everywhere or in specific spaces?
Well, I think what it really shows is in a very shocking way, is that government at multiple levels appears to be broken, and that the process mentality that is imbued in government across this country, that it's where we're focused on process over outcomes. This all came to a head in this truckers convoy protest in Ottawa at the expense, I might say, of the citizenry. The first people to suffer from this, of course, were the residents of Ottawa. And I don't want to overstate that. You and I, as you know, during the trucker protest, the people here call it the occupation, first world problem. But the trucker protest here was very troubling, very upsetting. It was awful for local residents. When these people took over the parliamentary core of the city, where there's a lot of seniors, there's a lot of residences with disabled people, a lot of people live in that community, just families, and these truckers came in and parked their rigs and sort of took over the city. The police did nothing, and at the beginning of the protest, they were honking their horns, 24 hours a day. And the first question that had to be asked was, well, why were they allowed in the city in the first place? Why? There was intelligence, and it's become very, very clear in this inquiry that the intelligence was there. CSIS, the RCMP, the CSC, the Parliamentary Security Protectorate, the Ottawa Police, they all knew these people were coming, and guess what? So did everyone else in the country, because it was on the news every night. Hey, we're coming to Ottawa with our big trucks. So what happened is,
but it seems like the chief of police in Ottawa really thought they were coming for the weekend, and that was it.
So I want to preface any comments I make about Peter Sloly by telling your listeners, and I believe you know this, that Peter Sloly, 7 months before the convoy happened, so in June of 2021, Chief Sloly, who I consider as someone who has a wide range of ability from A to B, he sued Ottawa Life magazine for defamation because he was not happy with our reporting on the management and the oversight of the Ottawa Police by the Ottawa Police Services Board, and he was not happy about our reporting on the over 80 rogue Ottawa police officers in the 7 years previous who'd been criminally charged, and not one of them had been fired. and he was not happy with the reporting we had done on misogyny and his response to misogyny in the Ottawa Police Service. So we wrote an article called Rapes and Lies, the Cancerous Conduct of the Ottawa Police. This followed a Fifth Estate report on the Ottawa Police, where a lot of the material used in that Fifth Estate report was stuff we had already reported on. But Mr. Slowly, at the time, who has my observation is this guy has like a massive ego. It's insane that you have a chief of police with a $345 million budget who's all very much my way or the highway kind of guy. He was brought into Ottawa. So we're just doing our job reporting on this stuff, but he didn't like this particular article.
And sued you.
So, Ottawa Life is not the CBC. We don't have the resources they have. We're not CTV News. We're not Global. But what he chose to do is he didn't like what we wrote. So he took a run at us and he sued us for defamation. Now, what's interesting, and this tells you about his character, he didn't sue us as the chief of police. And remember, we've never written a single word about Peter Slowly, private citizen. He sued us as a private citizen because even the oxygen-deprived Ottawa Police Services Board, who have all since been removed because of this trucker convoy. So remember, we were writing about them far in advance of this happening. We were writing about them, their incompetence, far in advance of this whole national disaster they brought upon everybody. But even they wouldn't go along with Slowly, who wanted them to sue us, the Police Services Board. So then he did it himself. And the reason he did it, and this goes to sort of strategic, tactical, clever people, he did it as a private citizen because that's called a SLAPP lawsuit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. And in fact, this law was brought in Ontario in 2017, 2018 to ensure and to discourage public officials from using their budgets in the courts to suppress journalists from writing about the things they're doing. So he did this to drag us into the courts. And since then, we've subsequently learned that Mr. Slowly was himself a person investigated, get this, by the Toronto Police Service back in 2004 for something called tyrannical and oppressive behavior towards subordinates. That's an actual paragraph in the Police Services Act, tyrannical and oppressive behavior towards subordinates. And at the time he was investigated, he was removed from his job at the 52nd Division in Toronto, and they did a year-long investigation that resulted in him signing a statement of facts where it was agreed that this woman that worked for him, a female employee, had been treated so poorly, she was given a six-figure taxpayer settlement. That's the background of this guy. And for some reason, this fella was hired by the Police Services Board in Ottawa, where they would have known all of this about him. What's come out in the inquiry about this guy so far is he appears to have, according to a lot of people testifying, he seems to have like some anger issues. He seems to get upset pretty quickly, go off. He said some really crass things to his staff. This is all testimony, alleged testimony at the inquiry, where he's made some really crude comments. He was very dismissive of a female deputy officer who was taking meticulous notes during all of this stuff. And he rebutted her comments when he was on the stand by saying, well, I don't agree with that. That's not, but she was there taking notes of everything.
I was shocked at how many notes she took.
Well, I'm actually not, because as police work, that's what they do. They take notes. The ones that are doing their jobs, when they go on a crime scene or when they're engaged with any type of new engagement, they take notes. They take meticulous. They're supposed to take notes. That's part of their job. So she was just taking notes. And I think in this moment, I think she was probably also in hindsight taking notes because she didn't agree with the approach he was taking, which circles back to your original question was, how did the trucks get in the city? Didn't the police know? Slowly, incredibly said, yeah, I thought they were only coming for the weekend. Are you kidding me? The Hotel Association in Ottawa had contacted the mayor's office and said, listen, we're kind of worried about this because we've got like thousands of reservations and these people up here, they're reserving rooms here and they tell us they're not leaving for like a month. So they ignored that information. Peter Slowly ignored the information that from it appears, and this has come out in the inquiry, I mean, the OPP superintendent who was assigned to deal with this said he was shocked at Slowly's behavior. He was just beside it. He said he didn't understand it. So Slowly himself has admitted that he let the trucks in the city. Now, I got to tell you something, Ryan. As a resident of the capital, I can tell you, for example, you would say, well, what's something that Toronto does well? And we would say, well, they're a great business city and a commerce city. And if we were to say, well, what's something they don't do well? Well, we'd say, well, like hockey, the Maple Leafs, okay? Now, in Ottawa, what is something that we do well? I can tell you. We've been doing protests since 1867, okay? People come here to protest all the time. And when they come here, we have policies and procedures and things in place to manage these things so that they're done in accordance with the law and the rules and in a civil way. We have deep knowledge in doing this. We've been doing it for over a century. So now we get this new chief here who I've said, in my view, and we'd written about this, and he sued us because he didn't like what we were writing about. We're questioning this guy's competency, okay? And questioning his record and looking at how he had performed at the Toronto Police Service, who, by the way, chose not to make this guy their chief, okay? He's all of a sudden in Ottawa, and Ottawa's got its own issues with policing. I've maintained all along the problems in the Ottawa police, and they are deep and they are many, are internal. They're based on misconduct, serious misconduct by rogue officers. Big problem in the Ottawa police with misogyny, big problem. And they have other issues as it relates to equity issues and some racial issues, but not in the same way in some of the other big cities. Those I would not say in my studying of the police in the city over the last 15 years that the race card is the big thing. It's other things. And Ottawa actually has as a police force, in terms of its racialized officers, does a good job that way. So they have deep management issues. So Slowly comes in, and it became very apparent from the time he got in up until the truck protesters, he was not effective in terms of his management team. His deputy chief, within a couple of months of him coming in, was who Slowly was backing, was charged with 7 counts of sexual harassment. 7 counts, the deputy chief. Okay.
This is way before the trucker convoy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but initially Slowly was backing this guy. And then one of the people this guy was harassing was another Ottawa Police Service employee, a woman who was married to another Ottawa Police Service officer. So these two people were married, and this deputy chief had been harassing this woman, this other policeman's wife, who also worked for the force. So this policeman went to Slowly, and this is all documented, went to Slowly and said, listen, this guy has to stop harassing my wife. Like, enough with this. And Slowly's response to that, according to complaints filed that are being investigated were being investigated by the Ontario Civilian Police Commission, Peter Slowly's response to that was to start moving this guy and penalizing this guy. This guy lived out in the west end
for speaking out,
in the far east end of Ottawa,
for speaking out, defending his wife.
Yeah. So Slowly doesn't do anything about it. He backs the deputy chief, who is charged and has since been, Now here's the other thing with the police. Okay. So
we got to take a break. We got to take a break for
Sure.
some messages. We're going to come back, but it sounds like you really think Slowly's a problem, and was before, and certainly he didn't look very good on the stand last week. So we're gonna have to come back and talk about that. But I also think that you've said very negative things about the police services board, the chair, etc. And so we're gonna have to come back to that as well. Anyway, we're chatting with Dan Donovan, publisher and editor of Ottawa Life magazine, tonight about the inquiry into the Emergencies Act. Was it needed? Was it appropriate? Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dan Donovan. He is the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. He's been following the inquiry in Ottawa quite closely. Obviously, given this conversation so far, you've been following the police services and Chief Slowly very closely over the course of the last couple of years. Let's come back to Slowly, and I want to finish that conversation. But also, if you could broaden it, because I think that you said that there was a problem with the Ottawa Police Services Board, with the chair, and then also what I've certainly read is there was a lot of dysfunction between the different levels of government, between the federal government, the provincial government, between the OPP, the RCMP, the police force. It was almost as if no one knew who was in charge and or was competing to who should be in charge. Anyway, back to you.
Well, let's start with the Ottawa Police Services Board back then, because they've all been since removed. The thing that would have greatly helped them in the run-up to this trucker convoy would be if someone had given them some oxygen, because it appears they were all like brain dead. This is what happens when you have a police services board. In Ontario, Brian, police services boards do have enough authority to adjudicate and manage police services. The problem is that the appointments are, in Ottawa anyways, are by three of the appointments are by the province, and the others are by the city. And the problem is they appoint people to these jobs that are not qualified to do them. Nothing speaks volumes to that more than the former chair of the Ottawa Police Services Board, Diane Deans, who clearly, next to Peter Slowly, was another person who would fit that perfect description of the Peter principle, someone who's risen to the level of their incompetency. They were running circles around her. She appeared completely clueless as to what was going on, along with several other members of the Police Services Board, who, by the way, one of them was leaking information to us about financial improprieties at the Police Services Board a year in advance of all of this happening, which I think is another reason why Slowly came at us. But the point is, the people on the Police Services Board, if they don't have any experience dealing with the police will use this line all the time. Well, we can't talk about that. That's operational. So anything they want to talk about that's controversial, the police will just say, we can't talk about that. That's operational. And if the members of the Police Services Board are clued out or even stupid, they'll do, oh, okay, well, we won't ask any more about that. So imagine you have that kind of thing happening, and then you get a situation like the trucker convoy, where all of a sudden you have a chief who's got serious internal problems. He's been on the job, I think it's around 17 months, 18 months. He has not in that time been able to put together an executive team that and
works well together,
group to support him. And I think a lot of that has to do with it's coming out now, it appears, his behavior, just the way he did things. It came out in the inquiry. Imagine this. He actually said in the inquiry, he doesn't look at his emails. He has someone else look at his emails to determine what's important and what isn't. And yes, sometimes they delete things. Hello, information age. You don't look at your friggin' emails, really. So this is what, and for example, when he was under investigation by the Toronto Police Services back in 2004, and this is on tape. This isn't conjecture. This is a fact. This is on tape, because the tape of his deposition was leaked after the convoy, about a month into the convoy. The lady who took an action and eventually got a six-figure settlement from the Toronto Police Services Board, which means to taxpayers, okay, paid a settlement because of his behavior. The detectives interviewing him said, well, listen, it appears why were you upset? And he's going, well, I'm paraphrasing here, but what's upset? Well, people were saying that they feared for this woman, like the way you were treating her. They thought, maybe she was going to, have a problem. Why were you upset with her? And he said, and I'm paraphrasing this, but this is basically what he said. He said, well, she kept losing her mobile phone, her cell phone. And I suggested to her that she might want to get a piece of string and tie it around her neck so I can get a hold of her 24/7. What? What? Are you kidding me? Who says that? Who says that? I'm not making that up. You can't make this up. So the point is, why would they hire this guy? Why would they hire this guy? They knew that. They knew that. And I'll tell you why they knew it. Because when you apply for these types of jobs, you're to disclose if you've had any incidents in your past. Now, that is on a record at the TPS. We applied for that investigation under the Freedom of Information Act, and the response we got from the Toronto Police Service was, well, we can't comment on that because that's a labor issue, and there's privacy and protection of individuals. We can't deny or that it happened, or we can't say that it happened. Okay. When I talk about the problem today with government is too much process, the Freedom of Information Act and the Access to Information Act were put forward in the 1980s under federal and provincial legislation. There's a very famous decision by Justice James Jerome from 1986, and he said very clearly, the Access to Information Act in this country and freedom of information laws in this country are meant to codify the citizen's right to the information, not the government's right to deny the information. But government has used the act to suppress and hide information. So we could never get them to even admit that they investigated slowly like this. And then, of course, the deposition leak, I don't know who leaked it, but somebody leaked the whole video of him being deposed. And it's shocking. When you apply for a job like a chief, you need to disclose if you had something in your past. Now, he either disclosed it and they ignored it, or he didn't disclose it, which I would be surprised by. I think the Ottawa Police Services Board knew this guy had these problems, but for them, this was about, and it's so typical in Ottawa. When he was hired, and in some ways it's kind of demeaning, right, to all police, and especially to racialized police, because the first thing the Ottawa Council is, yay for us, we've just hired the first racialized chief in the city's history, yay, yay, yay. That was their whole thing, and
that was the objective.
Going, hang on a second.
Not competence.
Like Mark Saunders in Toronto. There's been lots of other successful senior police, in the country who are racialized. Like, why? What the hell? Like, that's not the problem in Ottawa. We got a problem with road conduct and misconduct.
Okay.
So,
Dan, are you saying everything comes down to slowly then? The whole blame for the trucker convoy getting out of hand was slowly? That's it?
No.
Period? Full stop?
No. What I'm saying is slowly was the person become very clear who allowed the trucks in. He's basically admitted that. He thought they were leaving after 3 days. That decision goes to his competency and his judgment. That's what I'm saying. And the problem is he had all kinds of other senior police around him saying, don't do that. And he ignored them and he did it. Then when the trucks got in and weren't leaving, then he had a bigger problem because he was having tension. This came out at the commission this week with the deputy chief, Stephen Bell. And it appears now slowly he was trying to blame Bell for incidents. So now it's a he said, she said game. Then we learn the Ottawa Police Services Board, I think they all are like, they have these big lobotomy scars across their head. They're just so insanely stupid when you're watching this because it was painful for the city, very, very frustrating to see all of these trucks, all of these loud horns honking, all of the dislocation in the city and stores being closed and people, and then the Ottawa Police Service Board doing nothing because they're going back and forth with the police and the executive team of the police who are all fighting. Then you're wondering, well, the city has a legal department. Why don't they do a court action to get some kind of injunction to stop this honking? The city's legal department, they've got multi-millions of dollars in budget to do this type of thing. Guess what they did? Nothing.
Nothing?
I think they were skating on the canal and eating beaver tails. Like, who the hell knows what? It turns out the person who got the injunction was a university student. She went to court, filed an action, but now we've learned at this event that even that was political because she was tied into the NDP, a local member here named Joel Harden. I mean, good on her for getting this this whole thing. That injunction that she got stopped the horn honking and was a big moment in Ottawa after 2 weeks of that. But then it turns out that she was working behind the scenes with this NDP guy, Joel Harden, who's tied into this other councillor who ended up running for mayor and losing, named Catherine McKenney. And McKenney was, she did a good job during the truckers thing in terms of talking to her constituents and stuff. But McKinney and Hardin, and this other person, they have a certain narrative, and it's become very clear in this hearing as well. They have a certain narrative they want to present about what these truckers were. Now, let's face it, Brian, a bunch of these truckers were just kooks. Okay, they were kooks. This Pat King guy's nuts. In my opinion, this guy's just like a racist nut bar. Okay, but what's come out in the hearing is that a lot of these truckers who came, it started on a TikTok thing. They were just regular folks who were upset about COVID restrictions. So they started this thing on TikTok and said, everybody go to Ottawa. What appears to have happened is in the run up to that, some manipulative people sort of got out in front and claimed to be the spokespersons for this. And what we've learned this week is all of these people were fighting amongst each other. There was really no sort of organized leader of this thing. There were little groups fighting amongst themselves. So this was all very sort of uneven in the sense of how it sort of unfolded.
They didn't. Lots of it appears that like that.
Pardon?
Aren't lots of protests like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's my point. You know, the narrative that some of these people like Catherine McKinney and Joel Hardin and others wanted is much like what Justin Trudeau did, which I still maintain was the gas on the fire that got this thing out of control, when he just declared that all of these people were a bunch of white supremacist, racist, intolerant people. That was just so awful. And when he did that, and then he just went away and he just left that hanging. And it was not true, first of all. Sure, there were some wingnuts in it, like in most protests. I mean, you can go to any protest and find like extreme people, but these people, you know, I mean, as stupid as it was and as inconvenient and awful as it was, I mean, they're up there frying eggs in front of Parliament Hill and having disco dances at night, and they got a hot tub. It's all kind of
bouncy unseemly,
but it wasn't violent. But Trudeau lit this flame, and then Joel Hardin got behind this girl who got the injunction. Good on them for that. But then they were trying to. Their whole narrative has been very corrosive, that they're trying to claim all of these people are extremists, and they weren't. So what happened at the inquiry?
Well, some were. They had this manifesto to, effectively get rid of democracy.
No, absolutely. But it goes to my point. There were that small group of people, a bunch of wingnuts. And I think this is the other thing too. The media has to take a look at here in terms of how we reported this. It's almost like some of the media were looking for the real wingnuts in the crowd to sort of cast everyone's with the same aspersion. And I think that's something that has to be looked at. Even the CBC went on and made this claim that's now being investigated and was found to be false. They claimed, the Russians are behind this, on a live broadcast with no evidence, nothing. That was pure conjecture. It was all false. So there's a narrative. There was a controlled narrative. This is coming at the hearing now, that they were trying to position these people in a certain way. And again, I'm not excusing their behavior, because I'm from Ottawa, and people here are still very upset about this. But the way that the manipulation you see behind the scenes, what was coming out. So this NDP, MPP, Joel Hardin, Catherine McKinney, they had a narrative about these people. There was some soft manipulation, I feel, going on with this young student. If you watch her testimony, I think anyone would clearly see it's evident she was working with these people. And I perceive my own personal thing is she was being manipulated a little bit. But here's where it cost Catherine McKinney. McKinney was running for mayor in Ottawa. She was ahead at one point by 30 points. She and this other councillor were called to the hearing to testify about what happened to them. And very clearly, they were spiking it. They were trying to suggest things that happened that didn't happen, or they were trying to suggest things were far more ominous maybe than they were. And at one point, they got caught on a hot mic because the lawyer was asking them a question. The lawyer was not bilingual. He was just an English guy. He's asking them a question. And remember, this is during the mayoralty race 2 weeks ago. And when Catherine McKinney is starting to lose support, and she's on a hot mic, and she doesn't realize that She's on, like, the mic next to her is on. And when this lawyer for the commission is asking this guy a question, this counselor from Lower Town, who's basically misleading the commission, in my view, because he wants the narrative to be that all of these people were racist and supremacists. He would describe the trucks. Well, we saw the trucks like tanks. They were like tanks. I'm going, what? What are you talking about? What planet are you on? But this is their narrative. So what happened is, McKenney was sitting right next to him, and he got a question about this, and McKenney whispered to him, "Don't answer that in French. Answer it in French because you won't the idea he won't understand." She doesn't, and she's saying it like, answer it in French to mislead, like to deliberately mislead a federal commission. And for me, that was a shocking, shocking moment. It's disgraceful, frankly. And this tells you the problem. And
you think that's because that's why she lost the mayoralty?
Oh, I'm sure of it. Well, that's not the only reason. I think she had another policy where she wanted to get a $250 million loan to build 25 years of bike lanes in 4 years in the city of Ottawa. Now, I don't know if your people in Toronto know this, but it gets to like minus 30 in Ottawa for like 3.5 months of the year. And I can tell you there's exactly 2 people biking at that time. So she had some nutty ideas, but overall, I think she went into it. She was fairly well liked. But then so that bike lane thing hurt her. Then she really, in my view, that's her and this guy, Matthew Fleury, this other counselor, he is fluently bilingual, fluently. But they get caught trying to deliberately mislead a federal inquiry. And tens of thousands of people saw it. It went out in social media like wildfire. So I think the combination of that, her nutty bike thing, and the fact that the other candidate, a guy named Mark Sutcliffe, who is now the mayor, who actually ran a really great campaign, and I think has been in the community for years, and a lot of people liked him. I think a combination of him plus her 2 big foibles really killed her. But it's shocking to see. If people have time, go back and watch it. You can find it. It's a shocking moment in public discourse, and it tells you about the problem with politics today. That you get these people. This is why sometimes, I have an ongoing debate. Should we have term limits? Because you get these people in here and they play these games. They play these games at the expense of the public. So the Ottawa Police Services Board, when this was slowly lets them into the city, they're not leaving. The Police Services Board is clearly ineffective. Then the police, reports are a lot of police were calling in sick during this period. There's a lot of infighting with Slowly and his immediate team. They don't trust him. They don't seem to like him. Slowly gets on the stand. At one point, he's weeping. Oh, I'm so worried about the police and my heart for the police. Give me a break. You get a $350 million budget. You've got 1,500 officers, who are to protect this city. You've got another several hundred employees. We don't need the chief up weeping. Oh, I was so concerned for my officers. Maybe if he had shown that concern for the citizens in Ottawa when his police weren't doing their jobs. So Bill Blair came out and said that the government lost faith in the ability of the Ottawa Police Service to do their job. The RCMP commissioner has come out now. She's kind of whacked herself because she's got this whole thing happening in Nova Scotia, and her incompetence is, it's vast and deep. Okay, vast and deep. But even she came out. Someone who's vast and deep incompetence herself came out and said the RCMP had no faith in the Ottawa police. So if imagine you've got a very incompetent. This is not conjecture neither.
It sounds like the OPP. The OPP did as well.
For me, there was a deputy OPP commissioner who seemed like a very serious person who testified, and he seemed like to be, to me anyways, the only sort of reasonable person in the room, smart person in the room, who was tasked with helping the Ottawa police. And his comments about the Ottawa police and the infighting, and in particular Peter Slowly, are devastating. to the Ottawa Police Service. He was just saying like they didn't have a plan. He was solely at one point in this. Imagine solely at one point in this said, "We can't do our job. We don't have enough police." And they said, "Well, how many more police do you need?" He said, 1,600. Really? The entire Ottawa Police Service is 1,600 police. Okay, so what you need to double the police force. Now, here's what's interesting. When they finally put the action plan in motion, they cleared it all out in 3 days, no problem. So that's the other thing that's coming out now.
How many people? How many extra police?
Well, that's coming out now, but they were saying that a number of pretty well all the police forces, with the exception of the RCMP because they report to the government, but all the OPP have come out and said, and other police forces, we didn't need the EMA Act. We had the resources to do it, but the problem was the plan, and the execution and the leadership. But we didn't need the EMA, and they cleared it out in 3 days. And so it's quite shocking. All of this is quite shocking. Bill Blair worked with Peter Slowly.
He seems to have lost confidence in Slowly as well.
Pardon?
He seemed to have lost confidence in Slowly as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And again, to put it all on Slowly, I think would be not accurate. I think it showed at the Ottawa Police, it laid bare the competency issues there of their management team, the infighting that. And here's the most absurd thing. And this again goes, certainly with there's an attitude in government, I find these days, both at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels, when it comes to taxpayer money and the just lazy way that bureaucrats and others they don't even think twice about spending money. We saw a shocking case of this during the trucker protest when Peter Slowly, now remember, the Ottawa Police Service have a $343 million budget. That budget in 2018 was $289 million, and it's gone up every year since to $343. Okay, and that includes further operations, your communication, everything. Right in the middle of this protest, Peter Slowly hires Navigator, a public relations firm out of Toronto, and pays them $185,000 in a month for communications advice. And I'm thinking, hey, you could have picked up the phone and called me. I could have helped you out with this, no problem. Okay, you wouldn't even have to pay me that. This is not rocket science here, pal. 185 grand? Are you kidding me? And then they tried to sort of hide it. They didn't want to, and they got caught in a press conference when some guy in a tie from Navigators going around handing out press communiques, and the local media are going, well, who are you?
Who's this guy?
Yeah, it was from Navigator, and then that became another story of incompetence. It
sounds like almost a cartoon cop scenario.
Keystone Cops.
Unbelievable.
So here's the best part.
We got to take a break, and we're going to come back, and you're going to tell us the best. Sure. The best part. We're chatting tonight with Dan Donovan. He is the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. About I thought we were going to chat about the whole inquiry, but it sounds like we're just talking about Peter Slowly and the Ottawa Police Services Board. But if that's the story, that's the story. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Dan Donovan. He is the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. He's been following the inquiry of the use of the Emergency Act that's going on right now in Ottawa quite closely. But we've been having just really quite an in-depth conversation about the Police Services Board, about the former chief, Peter Slowly of the Ottawa Police, and that, I think effectively what you're saying, Dan, is that he was incompetent. People knew he was incompetent, and he was hired for one reason and one reason only, that he was racialized, first chief of color, and he handled this completely incorrectly. Allowed the trucker convoy in to Ottawa, onto Wellington, when most of the intelligence suggested that they were going to be there and stay for a long while. I cut you off. You were just about to say, and the best part. So what's the best part?
Well, the best part is that when there was a police services board meeting, and allegedly what happened is the police services board said to him, "You need to leave, or you're going to be terminated." And they agreed. Diane Deans agreed that he said if they paid him out to the end of his contract, cut me a check, I'll leave. And actually, that was her testimony as well at the inquiry. He said to her at one point in this, I'm out of here. Cut me a check, and I'm out of here. So he left. He's getting paid to the end of 2024, almost $1 million for this shellacking he's put on the city. He gets paid $1 million to leave, and then Diane Deans goes on her own without checking with the city council, and then of course tries to hire another chief who's not even from Ottawa, from southwestern Ontario. That came out in the hearings with testimony with her and the mayor. She taped her conversation with Mayor Watson, where, you know, because I guess she was trying to protect herself, thinking that this could all come out later. Where but to be fair to Watson, he said, you've hired another chief, don't you? You know, oh, really, really, you hired another chief, because you know there's like a process for that. I just want to go back to just to be clear about what I'm saying about slowly. I'm not suggesting that he's the only one. I'm suggesting he's certainly a big part of this. I'm not suggesting that I'm not suggesting in any way that he was hired because he was a racialized officer. I'm absolutely not. There's lots of very successful racialized officers in our city. What I am saying is that this is about conduct, not color, and that this is about competency, not color. And you know, because when he left, of course, you get some people, oh, it was because of he's a racialized chief. No, it wasn't. It was about his conduct and his competency. And that's clearly shown. The former chief of the clerk of the Privy Council wrote an article in the Toronto Star in the middle of this about what an abysmal failure of leadership in the Ottawa police. Multiple people, multiple other police have come out and said it's a failure of leadership. It's a failure of leadership. It's a failure of oversight. So that's the local thing. The citizens are angry because, you know, they're angry with the mayor here because during that convoy protest, imagine this, Brian, in the first 2 weeks of the protest, the city gave over 3,000 tickets out to residents living in that neighborhood. 3,000 parking tickets and other tickets. These are people who have to park on the streets for their homes and so forth. Do you know how many tickets they gave out to the truckers who took over the city? 110. And it never occurred to this brain trust at City Hall of councillors that we had that, hey, maybe we should pass a motion here to that we're going to have bylaw not give out any tickets until this thing is over. But they didn't. They gave all the truckers a pass, and they ticketed all the people who were the victims of this. So the incompetency, and then you find out at this inquiry that the mayor is off. He's in a sidebar lane doing negotiations with, which is very clearly come out that there were no real. It's hard to determine who the leaders of this thing were. There were so many factions and infighting. So this idea, this narrative from the federal government is now coming out that they were trying to, and there have been emails released on this. They're being manipulative, trying to say, well, how do we take certain things you're saying and format it in a way that it looks like it's a threat? It's very disturbing stuff. And that's their, you know, the federal minister, Marcel Mendicino, it's very clear he's misled Parliament. He's misled the public. It's very clear he lied. That's come out. What he said is actually been proven a factual lie, that he was claiming things to happen that just did not happen. This has come out in the you know. So the real question is, now they're trying to justify why they use the EMA when it appears that everyone agrees it's police incompetence. There was another plan put together. They said that we don't need the EMA, we can take care of this. The federal government, their response is, we lost complete faith in Peter Slowly and in the Ottawa Police Service and the Ottawa Police Service Board, so we felt we had no choice but to impose the EMA. That's basically where we're at now. It's become very clear that this was a dysfunctional council, a dysfunctional police service, a dysfunctional police service board. That meeting with some angry protesters who are tired of COVID, tens of thousands of others who are just tired of COVID and are down there protesting. And so these are all the things in the mix. And the narrative, different groups trying to establish different narratives. You know, the government trying to establish a narrative that these are white supremacist nut jobs. The police trying to establish, a narrative that, we can control this. It's just the incompetence of the Ottawa police. The federal government saying, this has got to end. Therefore, we're going to go with this first narrative, and that'll justify us to put in an EMA. So it's very interesting to me, all of these things in the mix, how this is going to turn out. And we still have more testimony to go.
Should Ford come and testify?
Well, of course he should. Of course he should. And this is another problem. The premier here has a responsibility in this. And he said he was in lockstep with Prime Minister Trudeau in calling out the EMA. And I find this really interesting. Doug Ford likes to do the rah-rah cha-cha thing when he comes, we support law and order, we support the police. Really? Well, what about the incompetency of the police here? What are you doing about that? You were the one that appointed people to this police services board who proved so incompetent. You have to account for that. You were the one who took no action when this police services board wasn't doing their job. Both Ford and the former Solicitor General were very aware, very, very aware that Chief Slowly had multiple investigations going on by the Ontario Civilian Police Complaints Commission into his behavior. There were formal investigations and reviews going on, and in fact, the article that we wrote in Ottawa Life magazine, after we wrote that article, we were contacted by the OCPC. They asked us for more evidence. We gave it to them, and it's only after we gave them that evidence that the OCPC then informed the General Counsel of the Ottawa Police Service that they were being reviewed because of our article, and that's when Peter Slowly sued us. So these are all things within the Solicitor General of Ontario, and that the Premier would think he's above. Like it's just, to me, it's just a big bag of stupid. Of course you should go testify. Of course you should be transparent and say what role you had in this. You should own it because you were in favor of it at the time. So I think it's just quite shocking. And I think Doug Ford is getting very bad advice in terms of, and then they're fighting in the courts. Hello, process. Hello, process. So here we go again. Guess what happens when Doug Ford fights this in the courts? Guess who's paying for this?
We are.
Guess who's paying for this? The taxpayers of Ontario.
Again.
So they're going and pissing away money in the courts to fight coming to a federal inquiry. Yet just on Friday, they locked out, they used the courts again and the notwithstanding clause to lock out education workers in this province who are highly underpaid. Secretaries, custodians, janitors, people that help kids who have Asperger's and other things on that syndrome. So, they don't mind spending money to try to suppress federal investigations, taxpayers' money to do that. Yet they turn around and they suppress hardworking people in Ontario who aren't paid enough to help educate our kids.
We're going to have to do a whole nother show on the notwithstanding clause, no question, and the use of it, and the preemptive use of it, because I think it's a real issue. We're going to take a final break and come back with a final comment where I'm going to ask Dan, bottom line, what's the inquiry going to find? Was the Emergency Act needed? Was the government justified in making use of it? Stay with us. We're going to come back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've had a really interesting conversation with Dan Donovan, who is the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. He obviously knows a ton about what's going on in the Ottawa Police Force, the Ottawa Police Services Board, the different characters that are involved, both at the Police Services Board, in senior management, some of the problems in that force. What you've described really does sound like a Keystone Cops situation, and not just at the Ottawa Police Force and the Services Board, but problems that you've described in the federal government, issues with the provincial government, lots of issues with City Council in Ottawa and the Mayor's office and council there. I guess I got two questions. number one, what do you think the inquiry is going to find? What's the decision? Was the Emergency Act needed? Or alternatively, maybe it wasn't needed, but given all this incompetence, it was needed because we couldn't deal with the incompetence. So what's your end result, do you think?
So I think, Brian, my observation on that would be this: in my opinion, the invocation of the Emergency Measures Act was a mass, crass abuse of power and of the democratic process in this country. Clearly, there were competency issues with the Ottawa Police, but the testimony has clearly shown that the other police who came in, had a plan, and they've all said, with the exception of Bill Blair, who's in the Trudeau cabinet, we didn't need the EMA to do this. We could, as bad as this was, we did not need. Remember, the EMA is like you replace the War Measures Act, suspension of civil rights, and a whole lot of other things in this country. And granted, it was on for a very short period of time because I think this Canadian Civil Liberties Association and others have come out very strongly saying this is just a mass crass abuse of power. So in my mind, unless something else comes out in the next little period, I don't see any way they could ever justify the use of the EMA in this situation. Here's the problem, and you raised it just before the break. My bigger concern for the mass crass abuse of problem of the EMA by Justin Trudeau is it lights a fire for other abuses of our Constitution and the misuse and abuse of our Constitution. And we're seeing that already. See, Doug Ford saw that Justin Trudeau got away with that in the winter. So now he's brought the hammer down and he's using the notwithstanding clause against teachers. When they have the right, everybody has the right to collective bargaining, but it's like hitting a fly with a hammer. But it's an abusive process, it's an abuse of the law, and Trudeau started this, and now we can see that Doug Ford is just saying, you know what, we'll use a notwithstanding clause. We don't have to pay respect to that. Why should he? Justin Trudeau just disrespected, how many decades of jurisprudence with a very dictatorial kind of use of the EMA. I hope that's what the commission, based on what I've seen in the testimony, I can't see any other way, but you never know.
Dan Donovan, editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. Thank you so much. This has been a really interesting conversation. We got to have you back in a week or two to talk more about the inquiry and the progress. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining us.